Just before we get started with today's video, I want to thank Brilliant for sponsoring it. To support Today I Found Out and learn more about Brilliant, go to brilliant.org/todayifoundout and sign up for free. So in the video today, we're answering a viewer question because Paul E. asks us, is it true that Canadian beer has a lot more alcohol in it than American beer? Canadians boast longer lives, safer communities, free nationalized healthcare, a cleaner environment, the most gold medals in Olympic hockey, and of course, poutine. But contrary to popular belief, one thing they don't do any different than their friends to the south is make stronger beer. When you're dealing with mainstream beers, those with the highest alcohol are generally stouts, porters, and pale ales with alcohol by volume, that's ABV contents typically ranging between 4 and 10%, though most mainstream beers tend to stay in the range of 4 to 6%. This includes Canada's popular Labatt at 5% ABV, edging out the United States' favorite brew Bud Light at 4.2%. For a few more comparisons using ABV, we have the US's Busch at 4.6, Coors Original 5%, Old Milwaukee 5%, Bud Ice 5.5, Keystone 4.4, Keystone Ice 5.9, and Budweiser at 5. On the Canadian side, we have Carling Black Label at 4.7, Grizzly Canadian Lager at 5.4, Moosehead at 5, Labatt Ice at 5.6, O'Keefe Canadian at 4.9, and Molson Canadian at 5. However, some Americans prefer their beer with a little extra kick, and United States brewers, they've certainly delivered. For instance, the kind people at Dogfish Head make the 120-minute IPA with an ABV of 20%, while the evil geniuses at Sam Adams have created Utopias, a brew that boasts a whopping 27% ABV. Of course, Canadian brewers are no slouches, and their breweries have produced some hefty beers as well, including Trafalgar's Critical Mass Double Imperial IPA with its 17% ABV, and the aptly named but apparently discontinued Corruptor at an ABV of 16%. As you can see from this, both nations boast brewers that make beers with a variety of alcohol levels, but there really is very little difference between the nations' respective brewers when you average them all out. This perhaps should not come as a surprise, as most people would like to be able to drink several beers while socializing or watching sports events without getting totally faced. As a result, the sweet spot for this type of recreational drinking tends to be in that 4 to 6% ABV range, which is favored by brewers the world over. So at this point, you might be wondering, well, where did the myth that Canadian beers contain significantly more alcohol than beers made in the US come from? And indeed, the US does have this reputation all around the world for making beers that are rather weak. This is despite the reality that the alcohol levels are pretty much similar in all nations. Well, it's generally thought that this comes from the fact that Canada, and most everywhere else, lists the alcohol levels in their beers by the aforementioned alcohol by volume, or ABV. As with many metrics, the United States initially decided to buck this trend and went with alcohol by weight, or ABW. This is the weight of the alcohol in a drink divided by the total weight. The key thing to note here is that alcohol is lighter than water, about 0.79 grams per cc at standard pressure and temperature versus 1 gram per cc of water. The result is that ABW in beers is typically going to equal 4/5 of the ABV. To illustrate, if you have a typical 12-ounce bottle of beer that is listed at 5% ABV, 5% of that 12 ounces in the bottle is going to be alcohol. On the other hand, take that same bottle but now list it as ABW, and because alcohol weighs about 4/5 of water by weight, it's only going to then be about 4% of the total weight of the beer in the bottle. It's the same amount of alcohol in the bottle, but if you don't pay attention to whether it's ABV or ABW, one looks less than the other. With most beers in the United States classically listing their beer by ABW instead of ABV, this ultimately led people to think that beer from the United States has about 20% less alcohol on average than their international counterparts. Today, of course, most brewers in the United States go with alcohol by volume, but the undeserved reputation for weaker beers has certainly endured. Now, we would have thought that there was so much science in beer, and well, if your eyes glazed over at me explaining the weight of alcohol versus water at standard air pressure, do not worry, because if you really want to get to grips with the science of something, then you can learn it through Brilliant. You've heard me talk about Brilliant before. They're a learning platform that focuses on active learning. This is where you're given a short bit of information like that alcohol stuff, and then you have to solve a problem around it, which actually greatly increases your chance of learning. Right now, Brilliant actually have something that we think would be perfect as a New Year's resolution. It's a little late, but you can still do one of those, I think. It's called Daily Problems, and it's 5 minutes a day that you can use to exercise your brain and learn something new. Each problem provides you the context and framework that you need to tackle it. That means that you can learn concepts by applying them. That's that active learning. This sort of short daily practice can lead you from curiosity to mastery in far less time than you would think. So go to brilliant.org/TodayIFoundOut and finish your day a little smarter. The first 200 people to do so will get 20% off their annual subscription and can view all of the problems that were previously done in Brilliant's archives. And I really hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please do give us a thumbs up below. Don't forget to subscribe, all of that good stuff, and I'll see you next time.